Our next speaker is Sister Marion Feis, who is a core member of Providence House and whose mission is to transition women who are homeless and recently released from prison back into society. To date, over 8,500 women and 4,500 children have lived at Providence House. In May of 2001, Sister Marion received the Ellis Island Medal of Honor, given in recognition of her work done for the women of Rikers Island and for her zeal in working to repeal the Rockefeller drug laws. This summer, Sister Marion Feis, who served for 23 years as a chaplain at New York City jails, denounced in a New York Daily News op-ed the practice of, quote, holding people in isolation until they are mentally broken. Sister Feis.
When Rosemary asked me to speak this evening, she presumed that the two preceding panelists would outline the history of solitary confinement, explain why it needs to be abolished, and propose humane alternatives. She suggested that I focus on my experience as a chaplain on Rikers Island for over 20 years. My ministry began in June 1984. One day, as I walked the halls of the men's jail, a young correction officer approached me. "Welcome aboard, sister. But tell me, what is a nice nun like you doing in a place like this? Shouldn't you be teaching or working in a church or a hospital? I hope you don't think you're going to save anyone here." I was startled by his directness and just smiled and kept walking. Well, I thought to myself, I know I don't have to save anyone. I believe Jesus already accomplished this. I could have told him that I've taught for 17 years and have worked in various parishes for 13 years. So how did I end up on Rikers Island? The journey began in 1980 when I joined three sisters in Flatbush, Brooklyn, where a convent named Providence House opened to welcome women who had been recently released from prison. I enjoyed living with these women and their children as we helped them find jobs and transition to permanent housing. For the next 3 summers, I volunteered to work with Sister Elaine in Bedford Hills Prison. Through the children's program, which she established, children were brought to the prison to spend the day enjoying the company of their mothers. My task was to help out in any way needed. I discovered that I could navigate a rigid prison system, was not intimidated by the guards, nor by the clanging of the gates closing behind me. So it was in 1984, when I decided to leave my parish assignment and seek a new ministry, that I thought of prison work. I did not realize that the effects of the harsh Rockefeller drug laws passed 11 years previously were kicking in, and thousands of mostly poor Black and Latino men were being arrested for possession and sale of drugs. New jails were being built. Rikers Island became the largest detention center in the world, and chaplains were being recruited to service the Protestant, Jewish, Catholic, and Muslim inmates. The director of the Catholic chaplains who hired me said, "There is no how to be a chaplain book. There is no formal training. So just be open to the Spirit and do what you feel called to." My ministry with the men involved listening to them, allowing them to make phone calls from my office, advocating for them by contacting their attorneys, and writing letters to their judges. Before leaving my office, I would always pray with them and give them a religious article and some reading material. After 4 years of working with the men, I was transferred to the new building called the Rose and Singer Center, which had opened to accommodate the rising number of women who were also being affected by the Rockefeller drug laws. When I was asked at that time what I found most disturbing about my work on Rikers, I answered it was the treatment of women who were accused of transporting drugs, which we call drug mules, and the treatment of women in solitary confinement, and especially of those who are mentally ill. I'd like to speak very briefly about the drug mule issue before that of solitary confinement. The strategy used to repeal the Rockefeller drug laws could help in our effort to abolish solitary confinement. Under the Rockefeller drug laws, anyone convicted of possession of 4 ounces of drugs could get a mandatory sentence of 15 to 25 years in prison. The so-called drug mules were those arrested usually at Kennedy Airport for transporting drugs, although some admitted transporting drugs for cash, many others were tricked or coerced into bringing drugs. Because of the mandatory sentences, most women, especially those with children, would not risk a trial and would agree to a plea bargain. This meant they had to say that they were guilty of knowingly and willingly transporting drugs, even though it was not the case, in order to get a sentence of 3 years or 5 years to life in prison. When I complained to an attorney about the injustice of the sentence, the reply was, "It is the law. We are only following the law." My reaction was, if it's the law, it needs to be changed. But how does one go about changing laws? Fortunately, I came in contact with the Correctional Association. The director, Bob Ganji, saw the injustice and made the repealing of the Rockefeller drug laws a priority. Interestingly enough, the Department of Corrections helped in the effort by allowing a video to be made in the Rose M. Singer Center where women who had been arrested for transporting drugs were interviewed. The video, called Drug Mules, was shown at the Time Warner studio to a large audience of those involved in the criminal justice system, including judges, attorneys, and legislators, and was distributed to many organizations. Rallies were held in Albany, state legislators were lectured, the battle cry became "Drop the Rock." It took over 10 years of hard work and much publicity in newspapers, TV specials to report that the Rockefeller drug laws, if not repealed, have been greatly reformed. I trust that it won't take as long to abolish solitary confinement in our jails and prisons throughout the country. On Rikers Island, the term used for solitary confinement is, does everyone know? The Bing. Okay. When I asked the captain why it was called the Bing, he replied, "After a time, a person's mind can usually go Bing." The Bing in Rose M. Singer consisted of a housing area with 50 cells. The rules governing the Bing may change with each new warden or even commissioner. In general, the women locked in the cell were allowed out for 1 hour in an outdoor area and were allowed out for a shower. Once a week, they could attend a religious service. Meals were slipped in through a slot. They could request a phone call each day to their attorney and once a week to a family member. The rules were a little less harsh on Rikers Island because it is a detention center. Once they get to a prison, the rules get much more rigid. But no volunteers and very few staff were permitted in the Bing. Because chaplains had a special badge, they could go into the unit at any time. I remember taking a deep breath before walking into the unit, which is either chaotic, with women yelling to be heard from one cell to another, or deathly quiet during count time when all activity ceased. I would go from cell to cell and speak to the women through a small opening, asking if she needed anything. I usually arrived with a supply of stamped envelopes. If one needed me to call her family, I would do so when I returned to my office. Most of the women had a glazed over look, which indicated depression. The confinement usually lasted a week, 10 days, a month, or more. Because there is a real danger of suicide, a corps of responsible inmates are recruited to act as suicide prevention aides. Their task is to make repeated rounds of the cells and report any suspicious actions to the correction officers. These officers have a special gadget to cut through any fabric. If after speaking mental health director and voice my concerns. A staff member would usually follow through and make an assessment. This could lead to a time cut or removal from the unit. I recall Lisa, a woman who it seemed was always doing bing time. She was obviously mentally ill. One time she stuffed the toilet in her cell with paper and allowed it to overflow. When I walked into the unit, the flood waters were frantically being mopped up. The result for Lisa was more bing time. Another day, as I approached the unit, a woman was outside the gate, sitting on the floor, breathing heavily and trying to catch her breath. She had had an asthma attack while in her cell and was pulled out to get some air and to await the arrival of the medical team. Around that time, I was told a pregnant woman who went into labor. A captain making the rounds got her out into the clinic. After that incident, late-term pregnant women were not permitted in the Bing, but they could return to the Bing after delivery. Adolescents were placed in their own Bing, which was in another part of the jail. There, perhaps 3 to 6 adolescents were under 24-hour watch. Although I always thought that the discipline of solitary confinement was inhumane, I deemed it a departmental policy and therefore could do nothing to change it. All I could do, I thought, was to advocate for the women by going to the mental health director or to the warden if I feared that someone was being seriously mentally or physically affected. Unlike the drug mule issue, where I could enlist the Department of Corrections and outside agencies to have laws changed, I felt powerless regarding solitary confinement. How does one go about changing Department of Correction policy? When I retired in 2007, I presumed that my days of railing against the criminal justice system was over. Not so. Last year, online, I read a message from the National Religious Campaign Against Torture asking that a petition be signed to prohibit the use of prolonged solitary confinement. The message stated that although we signed the Geneva Conventions against torture, we are presently in violation. It is no wonder that I felt so uneasy when I walked into the Bing. Without realizing it, I was a witness to torture. I also realize now that we can change policy by enacting laws to abolish solitary confinement. The past few months, I've been working with the Social Justice Committee at St. Boniface in Brooklyn, where 2 panel discussions have been sponsored and where participants were invited to sign the National Religious Campaign Against Torture petitions to abolish torture. The Social Justice Committee is also working to alert neighboring parishes and other religious organizations to take up the cause. It is heartening that congressional leaders set up hearings this past summer, that instructional DVDs are being circulated, articles and editorials are appearing in our newspapers. I applaud the work of the Human Rights Watch and American Civil Liberties Union for their recent report on the dire effects of placing adolescents in solitary confinement. Through their efforts and the efforts of so many others, consciousness is being raised regarding this issue. And one of the people that I really would like to congratulate and applaud is David, who for many years now has been speaking about this issue. However, it is distressing to realize that as many states, such as Maine and Mississippi, are working successfully to decrease the number of inmates in solitary confinement, the opposite is happening right here on Rikers Island in New York State. And there's something in the editorial piece by one of our parishioners, Walter Higgins, about that very topic, that we in New York State are in violation, and this needs to be addressed. Although the census has dropped dramatically on Rikers Island, more cells are being allocated for solitary confinement, and although mentally ill inmates are now placed in separate disciplinary units, a young man committed suicide just this past summer. So it is my hope and prayer that all of us here continue to work together to end this barbaric practice of solitary confinement in our jails and prison, as we affirm that every person is made in the image of God, is a child of God, capable of redemption and worthy of our respect.